members' time in committee if it's not going anywhere. The last thing I want is, and I am as guilty as the next, of saying, yeah, I didn't like the fiscal note, but I'm going to work with fiscal, I'll get back to you on it. But let's go ahead and have this whole hearing. It's a waste of our time. It's a waste of our resources. The better way to be is, hey, we have it 72 hours in advance. I've talked to fiscal. They got to the agency got back to them. We had another conversation. We went back to the agency with a proposed change, and we have a new fiscal note. And here's what it is, or we couldn't come to a conclusion. Let me tell you where the difference is. And then we have a talk about that. And we have a debate as to whether we agree with the fiscal note or not. Ultimately, we can decide what a fiscal note is. But the most frustrating thing is, and I had this happen to me over the interim, and it's going to happen again, I've been working on a bill since June. I introduced it last week. I'm not going to know what the fiscal note is. It's a revenue bill. I don't know what it is. If it has a fiscal note, it's dead, right? We all know that. And I put in lots and lots of time. And I'd love to be able to get it 3 days ahead of time and be able to tweak it so that we have a better fiscal note. Because once that fiscal note, we have that hearing, the next time you get it, final read. And if you're trying to do something revenue neutral, you don't know, and it isn't official till final reading. I appreciate the work Senator Stinner's doing. I appreciate the work that fiscal does. They say it takes 3 to 5 years to train somebody. I've seen the ages of some of those individuals. They aren't much beyond 5 years from retirement, maybe 3 for some of them. Maybe it is time we hire some more people in there, right? You should have a little bit of redundancy so in case someone goes down, all that knowledge just doesn't walk out the door. Institutional knowledge with term limits is more important than ever. We need to make sure our staff has that. I understand their concerns. It's valid, but work on the process, right? Because we do have a problem. We're going to give them a long runway. This doesn't take effect until next year. It's not as though I'm asking them to do it this year. I'm saying do it next year. Give yourself some time. If the agencies aren't following the rules, which we don't have the power, then work around it. Figure something out. I get it, PRO holds it. Talk to PRO. I get it, agencies don't want to get it to us in time. Talk to those agencies. But don't tie your hand behind your back because someone else isn't doing what we've asked them to do. Go to where the source of the problem is. That's what I've done. 24 hours is the source of my problem. If they need to work themselves backwards and they have some problems, they need to go to the source of that problem. We're giving them 10 days from public notice. It went from 7. Think about that. We're going from 7 to 10. 3 days, right? So that gives you 3 days longer to work on a fiscal note.
1 minute.
Thank you. But they're saying they want 1 more day. The math doesn't add up. I'm willing to give them 10 days. I think that's fair. If that's what they feel they need, I'm not a committee chair. That's fine. Give it to them. I'll give them 10, and I'll change the other. No later than 3 business days prior to final. If that makes the system better, I'm for it. I'm willing to compromise. Because that is what goes on behind the scene that, I do or do not know about. I think I do. All I can say is I've asked every question. If I don't know, it's because it hasn't been told to me. Again, they're a great office. They do great work. I understand Senator Stinner has to defend them, and he should. But the fiscal office works for all of us, not just the Appropriations Committee. And so those other 40 of us who have felt that or will feel that frustration, I'm asking for a little help. I'm offering a little help. 72 hours. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Haar. And Senator Hansen. Senator Keene, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Haar yield to a question?
Senator Haar, will you yield?
Of course.
Thank you, Senator Haar. Earlier when you opened on this particular rule, you made reference to a bill that was heard in revenue, I believe, on Wednesday, made a comment that you wished the fiscal note were available earlier, and I believe you questioned the introducer, which was Senator Craighead. Were you referring to LB 15 in that discussion?
I don't remember the bill, But it was one that had been brought previously, and it was Senator Craighead, yes.
Right. Okay, so what I would like to do, thank you, Senator Har, I appreciate that. I want to walk through, as he was discussing that, the fiscal office helped me understand the timeline about that specific bill. And so as we contemplate this amendment and what it's going to do to the workflow in the fiscal office, as well as getting us as senators the fiscal notes, I want to walk everyone through exactly using that specific bill that Senator Har was referring to, which was heard in revenue on Wednesday. I want to walk through the process with you. So you might want to grab a calendar or something visual so you can see this and understand the process. So LB 15 was introduced on January 5th. The request to the agency for the fiscal note was sent on January 6th. The notice of the hearing in the Revenue Committee was filed on January 11th, meeting the 7-day notice for its hearing this past Wednesday on January 18th. So we had a bill introduced on the 5th. Request for fiscal note went to the agencies the following day on the 6th. It was scheduled for a hearing on the 11th to be scheduled on the 18th. The fiscal note from the agency was not received by the fiscal office until the 17th. And the fiscal note was uploaded to the clerk at 1:30 p.m. on the 17th and was available on the website per the technology office at 1:38 for the hearing on the 18th. Now, certainly this demonstrates many of the issues that Senator Har has discussed in terms of the 24-hour reporting guideline, but what this timeline points out that with bills that are introduced at the beginning of the session, especially for early hearings, had the 72-hour rule been in effect, compliance would not have been possible. There simply are not enough days between the 5th of January when it was introduced, the time from which it was referred to the committee, the time for which the committee would schedule it for a hearing, and compliance to meet a 72-hour deadline for the fiscal note. So if we are going to assume a 72-hour fiscal note requirement, we need to look at extending that runway out to 10 days. And that's going to have backward complications for early scheduled hearings and early introduced bills. Again, as Senator Har has commented, you start at that end date and you work back. And that process requires that all aspects of the changes we are considering be implemented in that count back of that process. So as we discuss the merits of the 72, 48, 24, we need to make sure that we provide adequate runway space in advance for scheduling of the hearings, compliance of the agencies, and an opportunity for the fiscal office to get that information and provide the best quality information possible. It's a little bit more complicated than simply extending the requirement from 24 to 72. So with that, I appreciate your attention to that walkthrough, and hope you consider the full slate of amendments brought forward by Senator Stinner regarding this rule. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Keene. Senator Chambers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm demonstrating that I will not be distracted, deterred, or discouraged from carrying through on a promise that I made to my colleagues and the public. But you might ask, but you won't. If I say I don't care what people think, why will I go through the trouble of doing what I'm doing? Because of me. I made a promise to the public. I'm like a trustee. They're the beneficiaries. I owe them an obligation, which I'm discharging now. If every one of my colleagues sit as quiet as a mouse and refuses to speak when he or she should speak, I'm speaking for everybody now. On an article from the Lincoln Journal-Star dated January 16th, 2015, this language is found. Senator Bill Kentner of Papillion proposed the amendment for open voting on the chairmanships, holding up transparency as the reason. Quote, "It's not a surprise that the body voted to protect themselves. It's human nature," he said. Continuing his quote, "We brought it up. We got it out there. And I hope we brought a little awareness to it so people can kind of get a sense of how we do things and let them judge," unquote. They're getting a sense of how you do things by what I'm doing, and they can judge. You won't do what you ought to do, but I'm going to keep us doing this. I'm going to empty the chamber on additional days, just like I'm emptying it now. The record is still going to be made. I'm going to keep the heat on Kentner. And if he had any respect for his family, he'd get out of this place and never come back again. Would not show his face. If I were married, you think I'd want my wife to wonder if when I go someplace with the scallywag that I would be if I did what he did, when I see people glancing, and she'd have to wonder, are they mocking me? Are they commiserating with me? They know that I'm sitting with a rat, a scoundrel, a betrayer. You think I'd put my wife through that? Not on your life.